You're nothing but a charity case dressed up and paraded around." Harrison Blake's voice sliced through the dinner party, chatter like a blade through silk. Every fork froze midair. Every conversation died. His mother, Eleanor Blake, smiled approvingly from her seat, her pearl necklace catching the chandelier light like a noose of diamonds. "Pack your bags, Serena. You're leaving tonight, and you won't take a single thing that belongs to this family. Before diving in, let me know where you are tuning in from today. I'd love to know how far this story travels." Now let's get back to the story. The silence was deafening. 60 of Boston's elite senators, CEOs, old money royalty, all staring at Serena Maxwell Blake, waiting for the breakdown, waiting for the tears, waiting for her to crumble like they always expected the black girl from Roxbury would. Instead, she reached into her Hermes clutch and pulled out a USB drive, placing it gently on the white tablecloth between the crystal glasses and gold-rimmed plates. "Funny," she said, her voice carrying just enough for everyone to hear. "I was gonna give you this after dessert. But since you want to air our dirty laundry..." She smiled, the same smile she'd perfected during 3 years of their passive-aggressive comments and backhanded compliments. "Maybe everyone should see what's really been happening behind closed doors." Harrison's confident smirk faltered. His hand, still raised from his dramatic gesture, trembled slightly. "What's on there, darling?" Eleanor's voice carried that particular chill Serena had learned to recognize, the one that preceded her most vicious attacks. Serena stood slowly, every movement deliberate. "Security footage from your son's private office. Bank records showing the systematic theft of my grandmother's property investments that he's been liquidating without my knowledge. And my personal favorite," she paused, letting the tension build. "Recordings of Harrison and his legal team discussing how to have me committed to a psychiatric facility so he could access my trust fund." The gasp that rippled through the room was audible, but she wasn't finished. "Oh, and of course, there's the footage of him with Madison Pierce in the penthouse apartment he bought with my money, planning our divorce while I was in the hospital recovering from the miscarriage he caused." This time, the silence was different. This was the silence of a predator realizing they'd been hunting the wrong prey. To understand tonight's spectacular destruction, one must go back to where this story really began, not with the revenge, but with the slow, methodical dismantling of a woman who dared to believe in love. 3 years ago, Dr. Serena Maxwell was a 28-year-old curator at the Museum of Fine Arts, Boston. She had earned her PhD in art history from Harvard, built her career through relentless work and undeniable talent. And yes, she came from Roxbury, a fact that would later become ammunition in Harrison's arsenal. Her grandmother, Josephine Maxwell, had been a formidable woman who invested her domestic worker earnings in Boston real estate during the 1960s, when properties in certain neighborhoods were dirt cheap because black families were moving in. By the time she passed, those undesirable areas had become some of the most valuable real estate in the city. She left Serena a portfolio worth $12 million and a trust fund that would have made her financially independent for life. That's where Serena was the night she met Harrison Blake at the Boston Symphony Orchestra's annual gala. She was there representing the MFA, wearing a vintage Halston gown she'd found in a consignment shop and tailored to perfection. He was there because Blakes had been patrons of the arts since the 1800s, and appearances mattered more than actual interest. Harrison was magnetic in the way that old money often is, not flashy but commanding. Tall, with steel gray eyes and the kind of confident posture that comes from never having to worry about anything. When he approached her during intermission, she felt that flutter of attraction mixed with wariness that comes from being a successful black woman in predominantly white spaces. "You're Dr. Maxwell," he said, not a question. "I read your piece on the intersection of African art and American modernism. Brilliant work." She was impressed despite herself. Most men at these events either ignored her entirely or made clumsy attempts at flirtation. Harrison had done his homework. "Thank you. Though I suspect you're one of the few who actually read it rather than just looking at the pictures." He laughed, a genuine sound. "Guilty as charged on most occasions, but your work was different. It challenged assumptions I didn't even realize I had." The conversation flowed effortlessly. He was knowledgeable without being condescending, charming without being oily. When he asked her to dinner, she said yes. The courtship was a masterclass in seduction. Private dinners at Menton, weekend trips to his family's compound in Martha's Vineyard. Flowers delivered to her office at the museum with handwritten notes that showed he'd been listening to every word she said. He made her feel seen in a way she hadn't experienced before, not as the smart black woman who'd beaten the odds, but simply as Serena. The proposal came 8 months later on the rooftop terrace of the Four Seasons, overlooking Boston Common in the fall when the leaves were a symphony of gold and crimson. The ring was a flawless emerald surrounded by diamonds. "Because," he said, slipping it onto her finger, "emeralds are rare and powerful, just like you." She should have seen the signs then. Should have noticed how he'd researched her tastes, her background, her finances with the thoroughness of a corporate acquisition. Should have questioned why Eleanor Blake, who had initially treated her with icy politeness, suddenly became supportive of their engagement. But she was in love. Or at least, she was in love with the version of himself he'd created for her. Their wedding was featured in Boston Magazine, When Old Money Meets New Power, the Blake Maxwell Union. The photos were stunning. Serena in a custom Vera Wang gown that cost more than her old apartment's yearly rent. Harrison in a bespoke tuxedo, both of them smiling as if they'd won the lottery. In many ways she had, or so she thought. The Blake estate in Beacon Hill was everything one would expect from one of Boston's oldest families. A federal-style mansion built in 1847, with 5 floors, 12 bedrooms, and a history that included hosting presidents and senators. The interior was a museum-quality showcase of American antiques, Persian rugs, and oil paintings of stern-faced ancestors who seemed to judge every movement. For the first few months of their marriage, Serena felt like she was living in a fairy tale. Harrison was attentive, passionate, and proud to show her off at the endless social engagements that filled their calendar. Board meetings, charity luncheons, gallery openings. She was the perfect accessory to his political ambitions. Yes, political. That was the part of Harrison's master plan she didn't understand initially. Harrison Blake wasn't just running the family's investment firm, Blake Capital. He was positioning himself for a Senate run, following in the footsteps of his grandfather, who had served 3 terms. And in today's political climate, a successful black wife was better than any campaign consultant money could buy. The problem started subtly. Comments from Eleanor about her enthusiastic way of speaking at dinner parties. Suggestions that she might want to tone down her natural hair texture for important events. Gentle corrections about which fork to use. Even though she'd known proper etiquette since childhood, her grandmother had made sure of that. Grace Williams, the housekeeper who'd worked for the Blake family for 20 years, was the first person to show her genuine warmth. A Puerto Rican woman in her 50s with kind eyes and an uncanny ability to appear with coffee exactly when Serena needed it most. She became her lifeline in that house. "Mrs. Blake," she said one morning, using the title Serena still hadn't gotten used to, "you don't have to change who you are to fit in here. The right people will appreciate you as you are." It was during their 6-month anniversary dinner that Serena first glimpsed the real Harrison. They were at Saralina celebrating when his phone rang. Instead of declining the call, he answered. No, it's fine. What? Are you serious?" His face went white, then red. "I don't care what it takes. Fix it. Tonight." He hung up and immediately called for the check. His romantic mood evaporated. "What's wrong?" she asked. "Nothing you need to worry about," he said, but his tone was clipped, dismissive. Business. On the ride home, she tried to comfort him, to offer support the way partners do. He brushed off her attempts with increasing irritation until finally snapping, "Serena, you wouldn't understand. This isn't museum politics or academic theory. This is real money, real consequences." The words stung not just because of their dismissiveness, but because of the underlying assumption that her world was somehow less real, less important than his. That night, lying in their king-sized bed with its 800 thread count sheets, she stared at the ceiling and wondered if this was what her grandmother had meant when she de-warned her about men who saw dollar signs instead of hearts. The first major red flag came during her miscarriage. Serena was 3 months pregnant, a surprise that had initially terrified her, but that she'd grown to embrace. Harrison seemed thrilled, talking about legacy and the continuation of the Blake name. Eleanor even softened toward her, suddenly interested in discussing nursery decorations and family traditions. The bleeding started on a Tuesday morning. Harrison was in meetings all day, so Grace drove her to Mass General. Auxiliaris. The doctor confirmed what she already knew in her heart. They'd lost the baby. She called Harrison from the hospital room, tears streaming down her face. "Harrison, I need you." "The baby. I'm in the middle of something crucial, Serena. Can this wait until tonight?" "The baby is gone, Harrison. I lost our baby." The silence stretched for what felt like hours. When he finally spoke, his voice was carefully controlled. "I'll be there in an hour." He showed up 3 hours later with flowers and the appropriate expressions of sympathy. But something had shifted in his eyes. She couldn't name it then, but she can now. She had failed to deliver on her primary function as his wife. During her recovery, she spent a lot of time in the house, and that's when she started to notice things. Hushed phone conversations that ended when she entered rooms. Documents that disappeared from Harrison's desk when she walked by. The way certain visitors, always white men in expensive suits, would stop talking and nod politely when she appeared. Grace began leaving coffee and pastries outside her bedroom door with little notes. "Take care of yourself, Mia. You're stronger than you know." One afternoon, while Harrison was at the office, she decided to redecorate the nursery they'd never use. She wanted to transform it into a home office where she could work on her research. When she called the decorator Harrison had initially hired, the woman was confused. "Mrs. Blake, I thought we were putting that project on hold indefinitely. That's what your husband said when he canceled the contract last week." "Canceled? But I'm the one paying for." She stopped. They shared accounts, but the money was coming from her trust fund. "Never mind, I'll call you back." That evening, she confronted Harrison about it. He was in his study, door closed, having what sounded like a heated conversation. She knocked and entered without waiting for permission. "We need to talk." He held up one finger, the universal gesture for wait, and continued his conversation. "No, Vincent, I don't care what the optics are. We stick to the timeline. Because I said so, that's why." When he finally hung up, he looked at her with barely concealed irritation. "What's so urgent that it couldn't wait? You canceled the decorator." "For the nursery. Serena, we don't need that room anymore. I thought it would be too painful. I want to turn it into an office. I'm thinking of writing a book, and I need space to work." His expression changed, became calculating. "A book about what?" "The intersection of race and class in American art collections. How institutions like museums have historically excluded black artists and how that's changing." "That sounds controversial." "That's the point, Harrison. Art should challenge people, make them think." He stood up, came around the desk, and put his hands on her shoulders. It should have been comforting. Instead, it felt patronizing. "Darling, you've been through a trauma. Maybe writing isn't the best idea right now. Why don't you take some time, focus on healing, maybe do some volunteer work?" "I don't need to heal from wanting to use my brain, Harrison. Of course not. But timing is everything." I'm launching my Senate Exploratory Committee next month, and we need to be careful about the message we're sending. A book about racial inequality might not be the best. Might not be the best what? The truth? The truth is complicated, Serena, and politics is about perception as much as reality. That night, she lay awake thinking about perception versus reality, about how her husband saw her not as a partner, but as a carefully managed asset in his political portfolio. The breaking point came at a dinner party hosted by Senator Patricia Morrison, a woman whose approval Harrison desperately wanted. The guest list was a who's who of Massachusetts politics and old money. Serena wore a stunning black Tadashi Shoshi dress and had spent hours preparing talking points about arts funding and cultural policy. Instead, she spent the evening listening to Harrison explain to various guests how proud he was of her little museum job and how she was taking a break from work to focus on family planning. When Mrs. Morrison asked her directly about her thoughts on the proposed cuts to NEA funding, Harrison jumped in before she could answer. Serena's more concerned with the domestic arts these days, he said with a laugh that made her skin crawl. Though she does have some interesting perspectives on, what would you call it, darling? Diversity in exhibitions? The condescension was breathtaking. This was a man who'd once told her that her intelligence was what attracted him to her, now reducing her to a decorative object with interesting perspectives on her own field of expertise. She excused herself to the bathroom and called Grace. "Grace, it's Serena. I need you to do something for me." Grace Williams became Serena's first co-conspirator, though she didn't know it initially. Serena simply asked her to keep track of Harrison's schedule, when he left, when he returned, who visited the house when she wasn't there. "Mrs. Blake, is everything okay?" Grace asked, concern evident in her voice. "I hope so, Grace. I really hope so." What Grace discovered over the next 2 weeks was illuminating. Harrison's late business meetings happened with suspicious regularity, always on nights when Serena had her own commitments. He'd been having lengthy private conversations with his lawyer, David Chun, at the house rather than at the office. Most interesting, there had been several visits from a private investigator named Marcus Reed. Why would Harrison need a private investigator? Serena decided to find out. Reed's office was in a nondescript building in downtown Boston, the kind of place one would walk past without noticing. She showed up without an appointment, dressed in jeans and a Harvard sweatshirt, hoping to look less like Harrison Blake's wife and more like a concerned citizen. "I'm wondering if you could help me," she told the receptionist, a middle-aged woman with kind eyes. "I think my husband might be having me investigated, and I'm not sure why." The woman looked uncomfortable. "Ma'am, we can't discuss ongoing cases. I'm not asking you to discuss anything. I'm asking if you know Marcus Reed personally, because I'd like to hire him myself." It was a gamble, but it paid off. 20 minutes later, she was sitting across from Reed, a former Boston PD detective who specialized in domestic situations. He was a small, compact man with intelligent eyes and calloused hands. "Mrs. Blake," he said after she'd introduced herself, "I can't discuss any existing professional relationships, but I can tell you that if someone were investigating you, it wouldn't be hard to find things to question." "What kind of things?" "Your financial independence, your professional success, your family background. Some people might see those as threats rather than assets." He leaned forward. "If you're concerned about your privacy or your security, I'd recommend documenting everything. Conversations, financial transactions, changes in behavior. And if you ever feel unsafe." He handed her a business card. "This number goes directly to my cell phone." She left his office with more questions than answers, but also with the first stirring of real alarm. If Harrison was having her investigated, what was he looking for? Or more importantly, what was he planning? The answer came 2 weeks later, delivered in the most casual way possible. "Serena, darling," Harrison said over breakfast, not looking up from his Wall Street Journal. I've scheduled an appointment for you with Dr. Rebecca Sinclair. She comes highly recommended for women going through transitions. What kind of transitions? Emotional ones. After the miscarriage, and with the stress of my campaign launching, I thought it might help to have someone professional to talk to. She kept her voice level. I didn't realize you thought I needed professional help. It's not about needs, sweetheart. It's about optimization. Dr. Sinclair specializes in helping women find balance during challenging periods. She's worked with several political wives. There it was, political wives. Women who needed to be optimized for their husband's ambitions. What if I don't want to see Dr. Sinclair? Harrison finally looked up from his paper. Why wouldn't you want to feel better? The phrasing was careful, deliberate. He wasn't forcing her. He was expressing concern for her well-being. Plausible deniability wrapped in a loving gesture. Of course I want to feel better. I just prefer to choose my own therapist. Dr. Sinclair understands the unique pressures of public life. She knows how to help women like you navigate these waters. Women like her. Black women married to white politicians. Women who needed to be managed, shaped, controlled. I'll think about it. The appointment is Thursday at 2. I've already cleared your schedule. That afternoon, she called Dr. Sinclair's office herself. I'm interested in learning more about Dr. Sinclair's approach, she told the receptionist. Of course, Dr. Sinclair specializes in adjustment therapy for women experiencing difficulty adapting to new life circumstances. She has extensive experience with court-mandated evaluations and competency assessments. Her blood went cold. Court-mandated evaluations. Competency assessments. She hung up and immediately called her own therapist, Dr. Amara Johnson, a black woman she'd seen periodically since graduate school. Amara, I need to ask you something confidential. If someone wanted to have a person declared mentally incompetent, what would the process look like? Serena, are you in danger? I don't know. Maybe. Probably. The process typically requires documented evidence of mental illness or instability, usually provided by medical professionals. If someone were planning such a thing, they need to establish a pattern of concerning behavior, get professional evaluations that support their claims, and then petition the court. What kind of evidence? Erratic behavior, financial irresponsibility, inability to make sound decisions. The key word is documented. Serena, everything would need to be on record. After she hung up, Serena sat in her home office, the former nursery she'd finally converted, and tried to think through what she knew. Harrison had hired a private investigator to research her. He'd scheduled an appointment with a psychiatrist who specialized in competency evaluations. He'd been having secretive meetings with his lawyer. But why? The answer hit her like a physical blow. Her trust fund. Her grandmother's property portfolio. If Harrison could have her declared mentally incompetent, he would gain legal control over her finances. And if he was planning a Senate run, those resources would be invaluable. She thought about their prenuptial agreement, which she'd signed after only a cursory review because she trusted him. She thought about the document she'd started, noticing around the house papers related to her trust that she'd never seen before. And she realized that Harrison Blake hadn't married her in spite of her wealth and independence. He'd married her because of it. Now he was planning to take both. Knowledge is power, but documentation is a weapon. Over the next month, Serena became a forensic accountant of her own life. Grace proved invaluable, though Serena was careful not to involve her in anything that might put her job at risk. She simply continued to keep track of Harrison's schedule and visitors, information she shared casually during their morning coffee conversations. That Mr. Chun was here again yesterday, she'd mention, or Mrs. Blake, that private investigator, left his card on the hall table. Serena photographed everything. Every document left carelessly on Harrison's desk. Every visitor who came to the house. Every phone conversation she could partially overhear through the thin walls of the old mansion. The picture that emerged was methodical and chilling. Harrison had indeed been building a case for her mental incompetence, but he was smarter than she'd initially given him credit for. Rather than fabricating evidence, he was creating situations where her normal reactions would appear unstable to outside observers. The canceled decorator was part of it, documented as impulsive spending and erratic decision-making following trauma. A desire to write a book became obsessive behavior and inability to focus on appropriate priorities. Her professional commitments were characterized as neglect of domestic responsibilities and failure to support spouse's career. Even her friendship with Grace was being weaponized. Harrison's notes, which she photographed while he was in the shower, described their relationship as inappropriate emotional dependence on household staff, suggesting inability to form normal social connections. But Harrison made two crucial mistakes. First, he underestimated her intelligence. And second, he fell into the classic trap of narcissistic planning. He became sloppy because he couldn't imagine anyone being smart enough to outsmart him. She found the smoking gun in his laptop, which he'd left open while taking a business call in another room. His email correspondence with David Chun laid out the entire timeline. David timeline needs acceleration. Becoming more suspicious and potentially problematic for campaign. Need competency evaluation completed by month end. Have you confirmed Dr. Sinclair understands her role? Timeline for trust fund transfer? H. Harrison. Dr. Sinclair is fully briefed. Evaluation scheduled for Thursday. Trust fund transfer documents ready for signature once competency order is in place. Suggest creating additional documentation of erratic behavior before evaluation. Perhaps a public incident? DC, a public incident. They were planning to provoke her into some kind of emotional response that could be witnessed and documented. She forwarded the email chain to a secure personal account and deleted the evidence that she'd accessed his laptop. Then she began planning her counterattack. Step 1 was securing her own evidence. She hired a different private investigator, Maria Santos, who specialized in matrimonial investigations. Within a week, Maria had uncovered Harrison's financial irregularities. Properties purchased with Serena's money, but titled only in his name. Campaign expenses paid from her trust fund accounts. And most damaging, evidence of a relationship with Madison Pierce that predated their marriage. Madison Pierce, 26 years old, blonde, from a prominent banking family, and according to Maria's investigation, Harrison's longtime mistress, who'd been strategically placed in his life to help with his political ambitions. Their affair had continued throughout his marriage to Serena, funded by her money in an apartment he'd bought in Madison's name. Step 2 was legal protection. Serena retained Angela Brooks, a black attorney who specialized in financial crime and had a reputation for destroying entitled white men in court. Angela was everything Harrison's legal team wasn't: brilliant, ruthless, and completely invested in seeing Serena win. Mrs. Blake, Angela said during their first meeting, what they're attempting is financial abuse with a side of psychological manipulation. It's also illegal on about 15 different levels. The question is, how do you want to handle this? I want to destroy him, Serena said without hesitation. But I want to do it publicly, in front of everyone who matters to his career. Angela smiled. I think I'm going to enjoy working with you. 2 weeks before the campaign launch dinner, Serena decided to meet Madison Pierce. Madison worked as a consultant for her father's investment firm, the kind of job that's really just a salary for being born into the right family. Her office was in the financial district, in a gleaming tower that screamed new money trying to look like old money. Serena dressed carefully for the meeting. Understated but expensive clothes, minimal makeup, her natural hair in a sleek low bun. She wanted to look successful but non-threatening, confident but not aggressive. Madison's assistant tried to turn her away. Ms. Pierce isn't taking unscheduled meetings today. Please tell her that Mrs. Harrison Blake would like just 5 minutes of her time. The color drained from the assistant's face. "I'll check if she's available." Madison appeared in her office doorway less than a minute later. She was beautiful in the way that expensive grooming and good genetics can make someone beautiful. Perfect skin, perfect teeth, perfect highlights. But her eyes were sharp and calculating. "Mrs. Blake," she said, with a warm smile that didn't reach those calculating eyes. "What an unexpected pleasure. Please, come in." Her office was decorated in safe, expensive neutrals. Family photos lined her desk, including one half hidden behind others, Madison and Harrison at what looked like a resort, both wearing tennis whites and looking very much like a couple. She followed Serena's gaze, and for just a moment, her composure slipped. "That was a business retreat," she said quickly. "Your husband's been advising our firm on political strategy." "I'm sure he has." Serena settled into the chair across from her desk. "Madison, I'm going to be direct with you, because I think we're both intelligent women. I know about your relationship with my husband." Madison opened her mouth to deny it, but Serena held up a hand. "I'm not here to make a scene or to threaten you. I'm here because I think you should know exactly what Harrison's plans are, not just for his campaign, but for his personal life." Now she had Madison's attention. "Harrison is planning to have me declared mentally incompetent so he can access my trust fund to finance his Senate campaign. Once that's accomplished, he'll divorce me, citing my mental health issues, and marry you. The perfect political wife for the next phase of his career." Madison's expression didn't change, but Serena saw her hands tighten on her desk. "That's quite a story, Mrs. Blake." "It is, isn't it?" "The thing is, Madison, Harrison sees people as chess pieces. Right now, you're a useful piece. But what happens when you're not useful anymore? What happens when his political ambitions change, or when you get older, or when he finds a shinier object?" Serena leaned forward. "What happens when you become the obstacle instead of the solution?" For a long moment, they just looked at each other. Two women who'd been played by the same man, though in very different ways. "Even if what you're saying is true," Madison said finally, "what exactly do you want from me?" "Nothing," Serena said, standing up. "I just thought you deserved to know the kind of man you're planning to build a life with. A man who marries women for their money and discards them when he's done. A man who's been telling his friends that you're just a strategic relationship until he can upgrade to someone with more political value." That last part was a calculated risk, but it was a believable lie based on everything else Serena knew about Harrison's character. Madison's face went white. "He said that?" "Harrison says a lot of things when he thinks no one important is listening." Serena left her business card, not the one with Harrison's name on it, but her own professional card from the MF. If you ever want to compare notes about Harrison Blake's promises versus Harrison Blake's actions, give me a call. The night of Harrison's campaign launch dinner, Serena was a work of art. She'd chosen a deep burgundy silk gown by Zac Posen, elegant, sophisticated, and the kind of dress that photographs beautifully. Her hair was styled in soft waves, her makeup flawless but understated. She looked like exactly what Harrison wanted her to look like, the perfect political wife. Grace helped her with the final touches, and as she fastened Serena's grandmother's pearl necklace, she whispered, "You look like a queen going into battle, Mrs. Blake." "That's exactly what I am, Grace." The dinner was being held at the Four Seasons, in the same ballroom where Harrison had hosted their wedding reception 3 years earlier. 200 guests filled the ballroom: senators, congressmen, old money families, new money tech entrepreneurs, and the media representatives who would carry Harrison's political message to the masses. As they made their entrance, Serena played her part perfectly, smiling at the right people, making small talk about charity work and cultural events, deflecting political questions to Harrison with just the right amount of wifely deference. But she was also cataloging who was there, who was taking photos, who would serve as witnesses to what was about to unfold. Vincent Harper arrived fashionably late, looking uncomfortable more so than she'd ever seen him. When their eyes met across the room, he quickly looked away. Madison Pierce was notably absent, though her parents were there, chatting with Eleanor Blake near the bar. Dr. Rebecca Sinclair, the psychiatrist Harrison had tried to force on Serena, was seated at a table near the stage. Interesting. Why would a psychiatrist be invited to a campaign launch unless she was planning to serve some kind of professional function? The pieces were falling into place exactly as Serena had suspected they would. Dinner was served, speeches were made, and Harrison basked in the attention and support of Boston's elite. As the evening progressed, she could see him growing more confident, more convinced that everything was going according to his plan. Finally, it was time for the main event. Harrison stood to make his formal announcement, tapping his crystal glass to draw the room's attention. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you all for being here tonight to celebrate not just a campaign launch, but a vision for Massachusetts' future. He spoke for 15 minutes about his qualifications, his vision, his commitment to public service. The crowd was receptive, applauding at all the right moments. This was Harrison at his most charismatic, most compelling. And then he shifted gears. As many of you know, public service requires sacrifice, not just from the candidate, but from their entire family. It requires difficult decisions and sometimes painful transitions. Serena felt her pulse quicken. This was it, the public incident his email had referenced. My wife Serena has been struggling with some personal challenges recently, and while I've tried to support her privately, I think the time has come to address these issues more directly. A murmur went through the crowd. She saw people leaning forward, sensing drama. Serena, darling. Harrison turned to her with that same patronizing smile she'd learned to hate. I think our guests would understand if you wanted to take some time away to focus on your health. Dr. Sinclair and I have discussed some excellent facilities. Actually, Harrison, Serena interrupted, her voice carrying clearly through the suddenly quiet ballroom. I think there's been a misunderstanding. She stood slowly, every eye in the room fixed on her. This was the moment everything hinged on her tone, her demeanor, her complete control of the narrative. You see, everyone, my husband is absolutely right that this evening is about difficult decisions and painful transitions, but not quite in the way he described. She reached into her clutch and pulled out not just a USB drive, but a thick manila envelope. Harrison has been planning this moment for months. Not just his campaign launch, but his public humiliation of his wife. What he didn't plan for was me finding out about it. The room was dead silent now. Even the waitstaff had stopped moving. The USB drive contained security footage from Harrison's private office, showing him meeting with his lawyer to discuss having me declared mentally incompetent. It also contains recordings of those meetings, where they discussed the timeline for accessing my trust fund and the need to create a public incident to justify their actions. Harrison's face had gone white. Serena, you're not well. You're having another episode, am I? She opened the envelope and began pulling out documents. Because I also have bank records showing systematic theft from my grandmother's property investments. I have documentation of campaign expenses paid from my personal accounts without my knowledge or consent. And I have evidence of your ongoing affair with Madison Pierce, including receipts for the apartment you bought her with my money. Gasps rippled through the crowd. Cameras were flashing, not for Harrison's campaign, but for his destruction. The most interesting part, Serena continued, her voice never wavering, is that Harrison's been telling people I'm mentally unstable while simultaneously using my money to fund his political ambitions and his extramarital activities. It raises fascinating questions about his judgment, doesn't it? Eleanor Blake shot to her feet. This is preposterous. Harrison would never. Mrs. Blake, Serena turned to her mother-in-law with a smile. Would you like to see the recordings of you and Harrison discussing which psychiatric facility would be most discreet? Or perhaps the emails about how quickly you could gain control of the Maxwell assets once I was out of the picture. Eleanor's champagne glass slipped from her fingers, shattering on the marble floor. The room erupted. Guests were talking over each other. Reporters were frantically taking notes, and Harrison was standing frozen at the podium, his political career crumbling in real time. "Ladies and gentlemen," Serena said, raising her voice to cut through the chaos, "I want to thank you all for being here tonight. You've witnessed something truly historic, the complete exposure of a man who thought he could steal a woman's wealth, destroy her reputation. What did you think of the story? Share your thoughts in the comment below. I'd love to hear your stories.